Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations, where we're joined by the team once again. John is with us this week, which is wonderful after being absent for the last couple of weeks. So, welcome back. It's great to have you all here. We've got a fairly sizable topic to get through tonight, and deliberately so, because we can sort of fly off into any direction and will so. But we all have our own little presentation and thing to discuss, as well as give you some updates and tie some of this topic of good to bad to worse into some of the recent things that have been going on within creation research. But as always, it's about getting that big picture and about getting that biblical picture. And of course, scripture paints a completely different picture to that which naturalism, evolution, millions of years, present is the key to the past, all that kind of stuff is completely the opposite of what scripture teaches. So we're going to be looking a little bit into that and about that principle that the Bible teaches, the picture the Bible paints of the world that was very good, going bad, and now going worse, right? Good to bad to worse. So we'll be looking at all of that today, and it'll be great. But before we do, let's briefly run around the team and give a little bit of an update as to what we've been doing and what's been going on in the world of creation research. So, John, let's start with you. You've been away the last couple of weeks. What have you been up to?
I have. I've been in Rockhampton doing both research and education stuff in schools. And the first really good news I've got, I did a lot of work with the upper school group dealing with fossil skulls and fossil people. Obviously, he's not in the bright limelight there. There he is. And the good news is...
It was very imposing for a second there, John. With
Focusing.
slightly side lit, looked very imposing.
Put him beside me. There we are. One of the good news that came out of that, one of the mums who was taking some of the kids home from school said she heard the boys over discussing over the whole issue. And one of them said, after hearing what Mr. Mackay said, I'm going to trust Jesus forever. Now, no apologies. No backsteps or anything. Creation research is on about Jesus Christ, the Creator, not just about the creation. And I encourage any of you out there who are dealing with creation, hell is full of creationists. The devil's one himself. Yes, have to mention that. Creation research is on about the truth of God, the Creator, who is Jesus Christ. We make no backtracking from that. But we'll give you more details on our school ministry a little later. We've been dealing with a few criticisms as well from one person who said, you don't dig up fossils, you just buy them. From another one who asked, do you buy all your fossils? Well, let me just show you some. How are we for focus now, Joseph?
Looking pretty good.
Looking pretty good. Now, there's one of the most important fossils you'll see in our museum. Yes, we have Jurassic Ark and we have specimens of this up at Jurassic Ark. That's an outdoor museum that's already open. But in the slideshow coming up in my next segment, we'll be telling you about a new museum building slap bang here in Brisbane. And you will see this specimen there in a couple of weeks. You can see it's got thorns. Yes, fossil thorns are one of our most significant discoveries. And I personally broke that open and brought that rock thousands and thousands of kilometers back to Creation Research headquarters. And more importantly, can you spot that one? There we are. Right. Now, they don't look like much except for little drawing sticks or something like that. But when you get up close, which we'll show you in the slides, this fossil was found by me, was taken up all the way to Canada to the world expert who agreed they were Sordonia, the oldest known fossil on the planet in the evolutionist scheme of things. Old? Well, they have them in Canada and they put them in the Devonian rocks. And yet our specimen had been found in the Ordovician, the layer under there in their mindset of thinking. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, before I told him where he came from, he was adamant that they were Sordonia, a thorny fossil. Ordovician, way down the bottom of the geologic column almost. And when I told him where they came from, he said, you must have it wrong. And I said, here's a phone. Phone the guy from the Tennessee Division of Geology who was with me when I found them. And I've also taken young Joe there as well, and he's found some too. So we don't just buy fossils. Oh, we do. I mean, this guy here, he's not really a fossil. He's a cast. We do have skulls and that, some of which have been said from doctors, here's my human skeleton, which I used in training, use it in your museum. And Joe's just got one put into his museum as well. But you've got to be really careful these days about carrying around real human skulls. Real dinosaur skulls get you into too much trouble. But the human skulls are a lot more sensitive. So, yes, we find fossils. Yes, we buy fossils. And the good news, keep listening, we have just been given a building free of charge, almost exactly where we've been praying for over the past 30 years for our first Creation Discovery Centre here in Queensland. And Craig and I have been discussing the expansion of the Creation Discovery concept. And if he wants to add anything to that, I'll be grateful for him. But that's where we've been doing. I've been in the schools, great time. We've been digging up in Rockhampton, now back here, and just praise the Lord for the progress that Lord has enabled us to make. And if you're an Australian and you're free on March the 19th, go to our website, look up what's going to happen on March the 19th. And if you're available and not far away, think about coming to our grand opening, because the numbers will be really limited. But more about that later. Back to you, Joe.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, John. That's fantastic. Craig, what have you been up to down in Tasmania?
Yeah, g'day everybody. Not a great deal really, apart from the standard sort of week, manning the Creation Centre. We've been putting up a few new displays. We've got our dinosaur tracks that we got from Canada up on display now. We've been working on getting that bacterial flagellum that some of our regular listeners know that we bought from Vance Nelson. That's coming along well, so hopefully that'll be up within the next week or so. But that's pretty well it. Yeah, it's going to be great to have another Creation Discovery Centre in Australia set up, and there's some linkages there, John. I think we talked about the possibility of having it all on one website. So we do have a website if anyone wants to look at it, creationdiscoverycentre.com. It's fairly basic, but it gives you the idea of our museum, and we might be able to expand that a little bit more, include the Queensland Museum and perhaps others around the world as well. But that's pretty well everything I've got to report. Thanks, Joe.
I think that is something really vital to point out, is that even though we all have our individual museums in different countries, and we all have our individual sort of units of creation research, whether it's Creation Research UK or Tasmania or Australia or USA and so on and so forth, we are all interconnected. And so by supporting one, you are effectively supporting the rest, because it all gets tied in together in this work and research, and as well as sort of shipping people like Craig and John and myself around the world so that we can go and dig up the actual fossils and get them on display as well. So it's all very... everything is all connected, and all the support goes to all of us. So that's fantastic. Great stuff. Thanks for that. Diane, how's it been going your way? I know we had a newsletter item go out in the last day or two.
Yes, we sent out our regular email newsletter yesterday. Yesterday our time, hopefully overnight for the people on the other side of the world. So some interesting stories there. In fact, they relate to what we're going to talk about today, about how the world went from good to bad to worse. So we have a nice design story. We have a degeneration story, and we have a snake story. And if we have time later on, we'll have a closer look at the snake story. But if you missed the newsletter, you can sign up for it. It's free. It's just an email that comes out every few weeks. Just go to our main website, and all of the items do get archived. So if you did miss it as an email, you can still look up the items that we've put out, because we archive them all onto a separate website called the Creation Fact File. It's one of our multitudinous websites that we seem to be gathering these days. But there's masses of really good information that all supports the biblical worldview, or the biblical view of history, the biblical understanding of history. So do have a look at that and sign up for the newsletter if you don't get it.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Great stuff there. Sam, your update. What have you been up to? I know you've got some stuff coming up.
Yes, I do. Right. Okay. So we've got a few bits and pieces coming up. So look out for a new video from me next week as an update to the hashtag Bible Journey Challenge. So I've been plowing through. I finished Genesis. I'm now into Exodus. I'm into the plagues of Egypt. Exciting stuff. So if you don't know what the Bible Journey Challenge is, I am simply reading the Bible from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation in order. And there is a full video available on our YouTube channel. I encourage you to go and check that out. It gives you a little bit more information about the challenge. I've got something coming up tomorrow. It was supposed to be Wednesday this week, but it has been moved because unfortunately Donnie was ill. But tomorrow, I'm sitting down with the man himself, Mr. Standing for Truth, Donnie himself, and we're going to be talking about some bits and pieces that more of a behind-the-scenes look at the ministry side of things, what it takes to run a ministry technology-wise, and a few chats about a few bits and pieces. And also I'll be talking about my book that I'm writing. Yes, I'm writing a book. I'm getting very intellectual. I'm starting to feel old now because I'm actually writing a book. But anyway, moving on from that, we've got a little bit of a sort of a small sort of topic to cover, which I'll throw back over to the panel before we move on with the evening. The Mail reported a story this week. I'll read the headline for you. Boy who accidentally dropped a copy of the Quran at Wakefield School, which is in Yorkshire, receives death threats. The teenager is left absolutely petrified by messages, says mother. So I have a copy of the Quran. I've actually got 2 copies of the Quran. We're having a vehement discussion as to how many copies each one of the team actually has, to much amusement to everyone. But it just begs the question, if this was a Bible in question, nothing would be done. But yet, because it's a Quran, the whole Muslim community is up in arms because their holy book has been damaged and desecrated. But the boy was autistic and was just having a scuffle with his friends, and the Quran got damaged in the process. That's all it was. It wasn't anything malicious, and yet he's receiving death threats from Muslims. He's 14. Any of the team care to comment on this story at all?
Well, why don't we go to the guy who's actually debated an imam to begin with, and sort of palm the topic of discussion over to John.
Okay, yes, in your British system, it was a blessing to be asked to debate a Muslim imam. So we have a fair bit of experience there. And it, I guess you could say, started when I was sent a taxi to take me home from Heathrow to where I was staying in London for ministry. And it turned out my driver was a Muslim. And so we began talking about the Quran. And the one thing that became very evident is that he, as that ordinary Muslim, knew very little about the Quran. Now, I would suspect from my experience that many of the people who've made these death threats also know very little about the Quran, right? They see it as a book, as a holy book, and almost as a not to be touched, almost as a only to be interpreted by the imam or the teacher, the local person who's in charge, and they basically just do as they are told. Now, can I encourage the people who are out there, as Sam said, if this was a Bible, well, I don't know how many Christians have got how many copies of the Bible, but I don't know any of them who would have got really upset if somebody autistic spilt their coffee over it. Because while the contents of the book are holy, the paper and the pages aren't. But I do know some people who will get upset. So if you have a Bible and you want to do a debate against an imam, don't bring your study copy that's got ink marks all over it, cross outs of some of the study notes, red eraser marks, because they see that as absolute desecration. To them, they've made the print equal to the person of Allah, or the print equal to the person of Jesus Christ. And if you're a Christian and you're busy arguing about King James or whatever, can I suggest the person is more important than the print, right? Because the person is alive. The print's actually black carbon on paper. You've got to keep that in perspective. It is a means by which God has chosen to reveal his word from Genesis 1 to his servants all the way through to the last chapter of Revelation, but you must keep it in perspective as to what you actually have. I mean, you are blessed and benefited. I have 4 copies. I think I'm the winner today of the Quran, and I deliberately got them to prepare for this debate against the Imam. But I know Christians who work with Muslims who have a lot more copies, and in fact, they have copies of the Bible they can actually give to a Muslim, because many Muslims actually, well, they know Jesus is in the Quran, they know he's in the Bible, so they can't totally oppose the Bible, but they don't know what the Bible says about the Quran and what the Bible says about Jesus Christ as God. So I'd encourage you, read your Bible more than you read your Quran, and share the good news of Jesus Christ from your scriptures.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a sad world that we live in today, especially to see how far down the line that, Christian, not only culture, but also heritage, certainly within the UK, has gone. It really has gone good to bad to worse. It will only carry on getting worse as time goes on. So it's events like this that, if anything, confirm to us the fact that we need to be getting out there and spreading the gospel as much as we possibly can. That should really be our focus and our priority. So, get out there and do it.
And just before we move on from that, as a quick plug, as we've been talking about Islam, there's a brilliant talk by John, Allah or Christ. You can get that from our Creation Research stores in Australia and the UK. And you can also get it on our streaming site, Creation Research Live. So feel free to have a gander at that. It's a good watch. It's a good watch. And also, as well, since I was talking about the Bible Journey Challenge, this might be helpful for anyone who is doing the Bible Journey Challenge. Walking with Jesus through Genesis, that is the correct way of saying it. We say it wrong all the time. But there you go. It's a great resource if you're wanting to start studying Genesis. And
Craig,
I'll throw it back to you.
Do you ever get Muslims to your museum in Tasmania?
Yeah, we've had a number of them. We've taken them through. They're probably the ones that we've had through probably fit into your description, John, that don't necessarily know the Quran that well or hold that tightly to it, but they've come in and because they believe in Noah's flood, and that's the focus of our museum in particular. So they actually believe in Noah's flood, so they're attracted to it from that angle. But then we're able to present who Jesus Christ is through it.
Yeah,
and I've had that direct opportunity. Yeah,
great.
Is my lip sync better now or not?
Slightly.
It seems to be better.
Yeah,
it seems to
it's
be
just
better.
your internet signal has gone up. It says here, so that's fine. I've been pretty busy. And something to pray about. We have numerous health issues within my family, but in particular, my grandfather is not looking too good with regards to his health, so I'd appreciate prayer for that. So I've been over to Norfolk for a little while, but on top of that, we finally got round to sorting out the many piles of books in the Creation Research Centre. So when I moved over this side of the country, I brought all of my research books with me. When we sort of took over the ministry, we collected all of John's books as well, which were in about 2 or 3 different places around the country. So we've ended up with a vast collection of research books and study Bibles and all sorts of stuff, which for the last sort of couple of years have mainly been boxed up. And we've finally started unpacking them and sorting them through and setting up a bit of a library in the Creation Research Centre. So that's been really good. There's been 1 or 2 minor issues that have cropped up in the last couple of weeks as well, as there usually is. So as always, we really do appreciate the prayer that you guys do for the Creation Research Centre and for the ministry as well, because not everybody likes us, and some people would like to see us come to some harm. So we do thank you for your prayers. And yes, emphasising the point that John made earlier, Here we are, John. I've got my own specimen right here from that famous site in Tennessee, down by the quarry near Carthage. To see the squiggly wiggly lines, which John's going to talk about later. But you see, this is the flat part of the rock, right? This is where the layers are. But if you turn it so you've got a side-on view, you can actually see that these things are also polystrate. Right, the strata cuts across, and you've got these planty type things which are growing up polystrate, and they're the same Saudonia that John was talking about earlier. So yeah, we certainly do go out there, we certainly do dig up our own things, and there's been some rather fabulous blessings that we've ended up with as a result of that. And I'll always be grateful that John has been able to take me around places, as well as I've been able to go and dig and do some stuff as well, because it really does mean we can get unique specimens that you simply can't get anywhere else, such as polystrate thorns. So great stuff from there. Right, our main topic for this evening then is, of course, this good to bad to worse concept. John, maybe you'd like to just give us a very brief few words just introducing this kind of concept, because then we're going to go over to Diane for sort of a real life example of this good to bad to worse concept. So John, over to you for just a couple of words of introduction before we hand over to Diane.
Okay, a couple of words and 3 skulls. Have I got time for 3 skulls as well?
I'm sure we've got a few more. Yes, yeah.
Now, one thing that occurred to me coming from outside the church and reading the Bible from Genesis through to Revelation is that the history that came into my head from there was the opposite of what I had from my head from school, from college books, university books, etc., in which life evolved. My atheistic dad based his whole worldview on man's constant improvement. Despite the fact that many millions of people had been killed in World War II, he still had this technology is improving, man is evolving. One of the students I met last week at the school, I said, well, why can we talk and monkeys can't? His answer was, well, monkeys are still evolving the ability to speak. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're in a school, a church, or just out there in the military. A constant view is we have an increase in technology, an increase in ability, an increase in structural complexity. Whereas when you look at the biblical picture, God made everything very good. And the sad news, the horrible news, is it's on its way downhill. Adam lived to be 930, even after sin came onto the planet. Noah was the last bloke to live over 900. Abraham bumped off this planet at 175. Now, when you think about it, you and I, most of us, struggle to get to 90. And many of us really want to be off the planet before we get to 90, particularly with government policies on superannuation, you name it. We are finding it harder and harder because the real history of the world is from good to bad to worse, and slap bang in the middle is the record of Jesus Christ coming to deal with the real problem. The real problem is not the government. The real problem is not religion. The real problem is a 3-letter word called sin, or as I like to say, self-indulgent nature. So when we have a look at the skulls, and we'll come back to these, the reason why the kids were so interested is A, they really do like deadheads, and C, they had trouble acknowledging that the bigger brained ones were the oldest skulls, and the present day ones, you and me that is, who pride ourselves in technology, are actually the smaller brained. Now, that's probably a good enough introduction for me. Diane, take it away, because I'll come back with slides a little later on the thorns and the fossils and our new museum and give you a really good look at it.
Yes, this is a story that we had in the previous newsletter, not the one that just went out yesterday, about a little creature that people really like, which is penguins. So if we can go to my slides. And it was a story about how penguins turn underwater, because the standard story of evolution is that penguins evolved from a flying bird. And so you will find statements like this from the Journal of Experimental Biology. Penguins swim by using their wings as if they were flying. flapping them to guide gracefully through the water in search of food. Well, yes, they do use their wings to swim. It's not exactly the same as flying because the upward stroke tends to be more of a power stroke than the downstroke, but this story was actually about how they turn underwater. In other words, how they rotate their bodies to change direction. Now, if we go back to a flying bird, birds fly, and when they want to turn direction, they do what's called banking turns. And in fact, aeroplanes do this too, or pilots flying the aeroplanes make the aeroplane do this. And so they tilt their wings, and so that their underside faces the outward part of the curve. But with penguins, when they turn underwater, it's not like they're flying through the air. They turn with their underside on the inner part of the curve, and they rotate their inner flipper to generate centripetal force. In other words, the force that enables them to turn. Now, this might seem like a really useless piece of trivia that might be fit for a pub quiz, but not used for anything else. But it's a good reminder that penguins were actually designed to swim. They were never designed to fly. They have always been swimming birds. So penguins have always been penguins. And in fact, the fossil record also confirms this. So when they fly through the water, they are well designed to be a swimming bird, but there's no evidence that they evolved from a flying bird. And we see this in the fossil record. If we go back to the oldest fossil penguins, now what we mean by oldest is oldest according to the evolutionary timetable. So what the evolutionists themselves think are the oldest penguins, they are actually very similar to modern penguins. And in fact, this is a quote from the New Zealand. They have a wonderful, I don't know whether it's a newspaper or an online thing, but it's called Stuff NZ, which wonderful media outlet, I think, Stuff NZ. This is all about New Zealand stuff. And the oldest penguins, fossil penguins, are found around New Zealand. So they found these fossils that belonged to a penguin. It wasn't an entire skeleton. And it's dated as being 61 million years old. And one of the scientists who was involved in this said, well, this particular specimen looks very, very similar to modern penguins. And the title of their article was Waddling with Dinosaurs. So 61 million years going back to the dinosaur era, to the Cretaceous era. Ancient New Zealand ancient New Zealand fossil connects penguins and dinosaurs. Well, that's about the only connection, is that the evolutionists want to put dinosaurs and penguins into that same time zone. It's not that dinosaurs and penguins have any other particular connection. So the other interesting thing about this penguin fossil was that it was very large. And they actually said these were giant penguins. The large penguins presumably already moved with the upright waddling gait characteristic of today's penguins. So they were fully formed penguins that move on land the same as they move on land today. So fully formed penguins, no evidence that they have actually evolved from a flying bird, just that they used to be bigger. And we wrote about this particular find back in 2017 when the discovery was made. And then very recently, only this year, there's been a report, new species discovered, the largest penguin that ever lived. So this one is even bigger than the one that was reported in 2017. Now, it's not actually these ones I've got pictured here. These are the biggest living penguins, emperor penguins. The little one there is actually a juvenile. So this large fossil was even bigger than the current big one today, the emperor penguin. And the largest penguin that ever lived, fossil bones of two newly described penguin species, one of them thought to be the largest penguin to ever live, weighing more than 340 pounds. That's a seriously big bird. All right, more than 3 times the size of the largest living penguin, right, have been unearthed in New Zealand. Now, think about that, 3 times the size of the largest living penguin. So what's happened to penguins? Well, it turns out that the oldest penguins are the largest. Now, this one that they've given this new species name to would have been an utterly astonishing sight on the beaches of New Zealand 57 million years ago. So we're still in that same region, the Paleocene time zone, it's considered to be, right. 57 million years ago, and the combination of its sheer size and the incomplete nature of its fossil remains. So they didn't find a whole skeleton, but they found enough bones to identify it as a penguin. And this makes it one of the most intriguing fossil birds ever found. And of course, what's intriguing is that the further back you go in time, the bigger the penguins get, but they are still obviously penguins. So what's the real history of penguins? Well, penguins have always been penguins, which is exactly what Genesis tells us. Living things created according to their kind, and they have multiplied after their kind. But there has been change, and that's important. There has been a lot of change in the world, and we're going to talk about a lot of change in our whole theme tonight. So penguins have always been penguins, but they were bigger and there were more of them. In other words, there were more species of penguins, all within the same kind, but more variety, and they were bigger. There has been a lot of change, but it's not evolutionary change. What we see in the history of penguins is we see design. They are brilliantly designed to swim, to do very quick turns underwater, to walk on land. Brilliant design. But there has been degeneration. There has been loss. They have got smaller, and some of the varieties have died out. And in fact, this is what you get if you look at biology from the mindset or from the understanding that the real history of the world is from good to bad to worse. It was created very good, but it's gone downhill. So we can summarize biblical biology in the light of that real history of the world as creation. It was very good. And we see brilliant examples of design, and we love to report about these in our newsletter because they are good for just lifting our sights to our wonderful God and the amazing things that he has done. And we've got a story about that in the newer newsletter that we've just sent out. So we see design. Then we have a whole lot of processes which are ascribed to evolution, but in fact, they are degenerative processes because sadly the world didn't stay good. It was affected by sin and by God's judgment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the rest of the program here. And we see a number of biological processes which are real. Now, adaptation is actually a design feature, but it has helped creatures adjust partly to the world as it's gone downhill. Natural selection and mutations supposedly drove evolution for millions of years, but they are real processes and we do observe them today, but they do not make anything evolve. In fact, they are really good signs that the world is degenerating. It is going downhill. Things are dying out, and eventually some things completely die out, and you have lots of extinction. And so in the fossil record, we have lots of creatures that do not have a living example today. They have died out. Something between the beginning of the world and what we have now has caused them to die out. So we have a loss of species. So all of those processes, they're very real, but they are degenerative processes. They are signs that the world is going downhill, exactly the opposite of evolution. So lots of change. The world has certainly changed, but it has not evolved. Fortunately, that's not the end of the story. The world has changed, but God has not. It's not all bad news. After the fall of man, after that sin and judgment came into the world, God did not abandon the human race, and he didn't abandon the world in general. So the rest of the story is salvation and glory, but we are living in the period of good to bad to worse, design followed by degeneration. And so if we can come back to us, we've got lots of really interesting examples from the rest of the team to look at and talk about now as well.
Diane, I don't know if I've ever showed you our giant swan skeleton that I got from New Zealand, from the East Coast, but I notice Alan from New Zealand is watching, so he'll be interested. I took the leg bone up to the museum in in Auckland, and they certainly were amazed at it, because the size of this swan bone indicates that swans also used to be at least 2 to 3 times the size. And there's a couple of questions showing up there on, do birds keep growing as long as they live? Now, to my knowledge, they don't, but that's limited research at the moment. But I can see an automatic full stop coming into bird growth, because they have to fly, they have to lift off, and the same problems we have with aeroplanes. You have to balance weight, structure, and the design to fly. So do you have any comments on that question? Do birds keep growing, penguins, etc.? I mean, here in Australia, before it was illegal, I would often climb up the cliffs around the Perry penguins just to get some good pictures close up, right? I stopped doing that when one took off in fright right into my face and nearly knocked me off the cliff. So there are some dangers involved in the field research. You're not allowed to do that anymore. But in reality, we do get out there and we do try to get the evidence firsthand. So do you know anything about the rate of bird growth compared to, is it terminal?
Yes, it is. For the same reason that it is in us, in that they walk on 2 legs. So they're when they're not flying. So their weight is more or less vertical. And because of that, they can't keep on growing. The same reason that we can't, because our weight is not spread out. So that's why some land creatures, which are very low slung and have short legs, so that their weight is spread out, they can keep growing. Vertical creatures, particularly mammals and certainly humans, we have a sort of clock set into us. When we get to a certain size, we just stop growing. Our bones are designed to close up the growth centers that would make us grow vertically taller. And your story about the giant swan, I've actually been hit by a swan. That they live down here. Black swans live on the lake close to where I live. And I wanted to take a picture of some swan babies, some cygnets. And there was this lovely family of swans, and they'd come up on the shore. And I was kneeling down to take a picture of the little cygnets, and the father swan came up and gave me a good belt with his wings. Now, if it had been 3 times the size, and black swans are actually smaller than the white ones, I think I would have been completely flattened.
Yeah. The other giant bird I've come across in New Zealand is the giant Haast eagle, and I would suspect that's about as big as an eagle would get, for the reason
it is actually, yes. It's so that the biggest eagle we have, the big eagle that we have in Australia, that's getting very, very close to the size of the biggest size that you can for a bird to fly. Yes,
That's the wedge-tailed.
that's the big wedge-tailed eagle. Yes, which is a seriously big bird if you ever get close to one. Yes.
All right, Joe, I know Craig's got to go, so perhaps if we let him
Yeah, I think we should dive
while.
straight on to Craig's presentation now. Keep the questions coming though, folks, because we will be dealing with them a little bit later, and we've got plenty more to come. So, Craig, I believe you're dealing with seahorsey type things.
Yep. Yeah, got seahorses, but just on wedge tails. Had a lot to do with wedge tails in Tasmania. Found a lot of breeding sites of those and nets. So Yeah, that's part of my forestry work. A massive bird and a big example down here in Tassie, actually, of those birds. But you're always a hard act to follow, Diane. You do fantastic presentations, and I hope all of our listeners really appreciate just some of the teaching that you give us. It's fantastic. And last week, I thought your presentation on DNA was world class, and that's up on our website. So if you didn't see that, go back and check it out on the website, because it's fantastic, on the YouTube channel. But my area of work in the last 20 or so years has been with seahorses. And so I'm going to focus on that just a little bit, following through with what Diane says. They're a great example. The family of cygnathids, or seahorses, being part of that, are a fantastic example of the same sort of things Diane was talking about regarding both design and degeneration. So let's just have a bit of a look at the family here. They're quite a diverse group of creatures. We've got the seahorses, of course, there. There's sea dragons that are a part of the family, pipefish, pipe horses, and a whole bunch of other creatures that I haven't got there, including pygmy pipe horses, pygmy seahorses, and a few others. So some of the features that they've got that are similar are the fused jaw. In fact, the family name Cygnathid literally means in Latin fused jaw. So it's this snout that's the common feature, but they have a bunch of other features that are quite similar, and therefore quite reasonable that they're in the same group, including the gill location and structure, including where the water goes out in the top of the head. So when they suck food in, food goes down into the belly and the water gets shot out through the top of the head. Sometimes you can even see a cloud of the blood from the food go out through the top of the head, which is quite interesting. And that happens in both creatures. Their pectoral fins just behind the gills there. They've also got a dorsal fin on the back, very similar in both lots of creatures. And they have appendages. So the sea dragons are very well known for their elaborate appendages, but seahorses can have them as well. The little one I've included there is an Australian species called Hippocampus breviceps, which can have some quite elaborate appendages as well. And there's other things. It's the males that hold the eggs. So the eggs are transferred from the female. That's what a female is. And the male holds them. They undergo a courtship dance when they're mating. All of them seem to do that. And they all have the ability to change colour as well. So these are some of the similar features that they have. In a book that we have on seahorse by one of the real experts on this group of animals, on the cygnathids more broadly, is Rudy Kuda. And he says this, that the leafy sea dragon is the ultimate in evolution. And what he's getting at is that they are so good at camouflaging in amongst weed in the ocean that they must have evolved this capability to hide so well, because they're a fragile creature. They've got nothing else to defend themselves with in a vicious ocean, but are still here after all these millions of years, supposedly, because they're so good at hiding. So they've evolved this capability. However, the cygnathid group does show similarities between the different groups of animals in it in many ways. And there are some animals like this one, which is called the ribbon sea dragon, that seems to have features that are intermediate between a seahorse, for example, and a sea dragon, including a partial pouch. We had these at Seahorse World, and we were quite surprised one day when one of them gave birth, because we didn't know it was pregnant. You can't really tell in this creature, whereas you can on a sea dragon, on a leafy sea dragon, or in a seahorse you can usually tell. But this one's got flaps of skin. It's almost like a half pouch on the belly, and the young were hidden in behind this. So when it gave birth, we were quite surprised, but we could see the sort of half pouch open up at this point. When I say variable cirri there, that means the appendages there can either grow or they can decline. So in a lot of the pipefish, they have no cirri, no appendages. In the sea dragons, they do. And this one is showing that they can actually grow them and lose them and grow them back again. And we do see that in some of the seahorses as well. And this is a pipefish as well that has got a prehensile tail. That means it can curl up, whereas a lot of the pipefish, they can't really curl their tails up at all, but the seahorse can as well. And I'll cover that a little bit more in detail as we go. So evolution, in summary, is basically saying that less complex animals become more complex animals. And that has to happen when you go from an amoeba through to a human by genetic information being gained in the organism. Creation is fundamentally different. We're saying that God created complex animals and that over time they become less complex or they become more specialized, but they remain within the same kind. As the Bible says, that creatures reproduced after their own kind. So genetic information has to be lost or at least modified through mutation in that process, but it's never gained. So the official line in secular evolutionary biology is that a creature changes to become better suited to its environment over time through adaptations. And this is taught in our schools. And even in a Christian school this week, a teacher was giving me examples of adaptation that she thought were quite reasonable, but really were evolutionary. And it surprised her to find that out. So we've got to be very careful when we say things are adapting because it's really an evolutionary process that they're talking about. So is the seahorse prehensile tail an adaptation, as the evolutionists want us to believe? This is this ability to curl right up like this, which the pipefish don't have, or the sea dragons don't have. Is it an evolutionary adaptation? Well, people that have looked at the armour and structure of a seahorse have said this, and they've tried to copy it, have said that they are biologically inspired designs, the work that they're doing using the seahorse design. They're saying they've got biologically inspired designs. And this is one of the troubles that the evolutionary people have, is that they cannot help but use words like design or even organize there, so that they're saying their armored plates within the body are organized. So they just can't help but use some of these sorts of statements that really infer very clever design. But how can it be organized through evolution? This is a sign that I saw a number of years ago at the Melbourne Museum, which is talking about all evolution is marvelous mistakes. They're errors. So how can errors organize anything? I won't labour on that too much as we've got a little bit of limited time. But in the research that one of these guys was doing on the seahorse tail and armour system, they say this: the square architecture is better than the circular one in the context of two integrated functions, grasping ability and crushing resistance. In other words, the armour of a seahorse is designed in the tail particularly to hold on to things. The square cross-section gives them a better capacity to hold on and grip compared to the rounded cross-section. And that just cries out design. But pipefish don't have prehensile tails. They can't curl up. And evolution says that pipefish evolved the capacity to have prehensile tails and became seahorses. So they also evolved pouches, because pipefish also don't have pouches in the males like the seahorses do. So this is another thing that evolved. So how does that fit in with reality? Well, creation says the opposite, that pipefish were either specially created as separate individuals or they lost features that their ancestors had. So they don't have a pouch, as I said, they don't have a prehensile tail, and they rarely have this cirri growth that you can see on the seahorse picture there. And that cirri, by the way, a seahorse can grow it, lose it, and grow it back again. We were at a conference in the USA where a molecular biologist actually said that pipefish have become elongated in their body due to a degeneration in their genes. So this is actually a degenerative effect in the pipefish that has them to become elongated. So one should ask, well, is it degeneration that has caused a loss in the pouch and a loss in the ability for the tail to curl up? And maybe they've lost the cirri as well. And remember that intermediate ribbon sea dragon that we talked about that has a half pouch, it has cirri as well. I think that seahorses certainly have degenerated in certain forms. There's still some beautiful creatures out there. The pygmy seahorse, as you can see here, appears to be a degenerative seahorse. It's very small. We're just talking about size in creatures, but it's a beautiful seahorse, but it looks very deformed just by even looking at it. And you find these throughout the South Pacific in particular. But this seahorse expert, Rudi Kuta, has also said that the features in seahorses and pipefish and so on seem to have degenerated in the fossil record. So just read that quote there in the yellow. In fossils, the various features that were common between different groups may have degenerated in modern species, such as certain fins. And some of the extinct forms represented links between different groups. So did live birth evolve? Well, I think we've talked about this on the show in the past, but in one paper looking at live birth in seahorses where it's the male that gives birth, they actually make this statement that live birth has evolved more than 150 times in vertebrates and represents an excellent model system for studying the evolution of complex traits. Well, how can you evolve gradually complex traits like live birth? In the seahorse alone, which is probably a relatively simple example of live birth, it's still very complex. It needs things like gas exchange to be happening, waste removal. You've got to be able to transport nutrients to the developing embryo. You've got to get the eggs into the pouch in the first place. And all of these things have to be operational within one generation for it to be something that gives you a live creature. Anything goes wrong there and you've got death, not life, and not evolution. So I think this is something that's impossible. Has a pipefish changed in the fossil record? Well, not much. There's a fossil pipefish we've got. So this is a result of Noah's flood. Then we must conclude that the changes between pipefish, sea dragons, and seahorses, etc., must have happened very early in the history of the world after creation. And Rudi Kuta admits this as well, that there's very little difference in the fossil examples of seahorses and pipefish to the ones we have today. Fossilized ancestors of pipefishes and their relatives from around 50 million years ago are very similar to the more elaborate family members today. So evolution is basically saying these things are evolving. If you look at the creatures on the right, they're saying they're all alive today, and they're saying it's going from the bottom up to the top, evolving, whereas creation is saying it's going the other way, that they're losing features, they're losing pouches, they're losing the ability for the curled tail, cirri, and so on. Is this an extraordinary faith to believe that they've evolved it? Because they actually don't have the evidence that they've evolved from anything else. Seahorses have evolved along different lineages well before the periods from which signathid fossils are known, says our expert Rudi Kuta. Well, that means we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen any evidence that they've evolved from any other creature at all. And here's just one to finish off with. This is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll give you the conclusion of what it's saying in a moment. In the Journal of Fish Biology, these guys said that despite their importance as evolutionary and ecological model systems, the phylogenetic relationships amongst gasterostoforms, which include seahorses, remain poorly understood, complicating efforts to understand the evolutionary origins of the exceptional morphological and behavioural diversity of this group. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, I'll translate it for you. In English, it means we have no evidence that seahorses evolved from anything. So I'll hand it back to you, Joe. That's what I had to to go through today.
Thanks for that, Craig. I've just got a little fossil and thingy example here. This is a pipefish, an actual specimen of a pipefish, which my brother actually found on the North Norfolk coast. We have it's the common pipefish. It's the one that we have here in the UK. And then from Italy, we have our fossil one here. And you can actually see, put them sort of side by side to each other and hold them up next to each other. You can just see just how strikingly similar they actually are, even in terms of the curvature in which they've actually been buried in and fossilized in. So it's pretty spectacular, really. And
so that elongated body is a result of, apparently, according to the molecular biologists, a degeneration.
Yeah.
So can I interrupt here and say, Craig, you not only run our Creation Discovery Centre in Tasmania, you actually, for many years, you and your wife ran the Seahorse World, which breeds all these seahorses, or as many as you can, correct?
Yeah, so we've done that for more than 20 years. And in fact, this month, is our 25th anniversary from when we started.
So folks can come and see a lot of these seahorses. So they leave Launceston, they drive up to Beauty Point about 3/4 of an hour max, and they visit our Creation Museum, which is spectacular. And then they can go and see your little thousands and thousands of seahorses at the Seahorse World, correct? A great day out.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Be fantastic. Got some sea dragons there, the weedy sea dragons, and occasionally we got pipefish and seahorses as well.
Yeah.
But I do have a question for Diane about it, if it's okay. We don't see fossil sea dragons, as far as I know. Maybe we do, but I've never heard of a fossil sea dragon. We get fossil pipefish, fossil seahorses, very similar. But from a creation perspective, I'm presuming that there must have been an original created kind that had all the genetic information that then sort of, degenerated or certainly modified out. Is this some sort of process that we see in other creatures where it happens quickly, maybe soon after creation, and then some of these other creatures are then fossilized, like the pipefish at the time of Noah's flood?
Diane?
Well, some of the losses are actually in the growth control genes. In other words, genes don't get turned on, or they get turned on at the wrong time, as well as actual losses of the structural genes that make those structures. But either way, it is a loss. It can be a loss of control. Now, all of this only takes one generation, and you've lost a whole function. So if it's one of the growth control genes that actually start off the process of building maybe those extensions, well, then they're all gone. So that can be lost in one generation. So it can be quite a rapid process.
It's also worth pointing out
Makes sense.
and I think John can comment on this as well, but as far as I'm aware, almost all of the, certainly pipefish fossils, but many of the seahorse ones as well, are from rocks that we would consider to be post-flood. Right, as in they are essentially very, very small deposits in places like Italy and some in South America as well. They're only sort of like a few miles square, right? When you compare that to the obvious flood rocks, like some of the Jurassic rocks that cover entire continents, it's fairly obvious that we're dealing with certainly a catastrophic flooding event, but something that's quite a lot smaller. So it makes sense that because what you have at the end of the flood is the first ever reference to climate change, it really does seem like a massive change in climate because of a global flood is what has forced many of these creatures into adaptation which was not required before. That includes playing on genes being switched on, switched off, and mutations and going downhill and so on and so forth, right? As well as stuff like predation is going to be on the increase and stuff like that. So if you happen to, mutate to be leafy looking and you can hide in the seaweed, you're more likely to be able to survive than if you're not. So there's things like that which are all indications of serious adaptation or forced adaptation rather, as a result of major climate change after Noah's flood.
Well, if they're post-flood fossils, that would really explain something, Joe. A real question that I've had about when does the change occur.
Joe, can I interrupt you at the moment? Because there's a few people who've sent in donations. There's a few good questions coming up about does this variation, is it already built in? Whereas you are saying mutations are occurring and it's degenerate. So why don't we get Sam to give us some thank yous and also to any questions he
I
wants.
definitely think it's time to have a bit of a break and to delve into some Q&A. But I think I think you'd agree with me there, wouldn't you, John, that most of these are post-flood deposits?
They definitely, the smaller deposits that I've seen around the world of things like seahorses and that are definitely too small to be Noah's flood.
Yeah. Many of these, in fact, Italy seems to be the hotspot. The Pliocene of Italy seems to be the hotspot for these pipefish and seahorses and stuff, and that's where I know the samples that you've got, the fossil ones you've got, Craig, are from. So yeah, no, that makes a lot more sense. Anyway, yeah, Sam, over to you now for some thank yous and some questions, and let's spend a little bit of time on that before Craig is going to need to leave a little bit earlier this evening, but we've still got two big things to go through. So Sam, over to you.
All righty. So we've got some thank yous to go through first. Doki Doki coming in swinging with 5 US buckaroos, lemon character taking his sunglasses off and raising his arm to greet someone, imitated by Baby Lemon.
It's been a while since we've mentioned this, and we've had a lot of new subscribers recently. So if we do have anybody joining us, welcome. Yeah. But it's worth pointing out that the software that we use, when you give a super chat on YouTube in the live chat, it obviously has these little, I don't know what you'd call them, emojis or whatever. When it gets translated over to our software program, it doesn't have those emojis. It just gives a description of the emojis, which is why we get these interesting descriptions come through. But thank you all anyway very much.
Wonderful.
They're great, aren't they? Thank you very much for the donations. We do really, really appreciate that. Back to you, Sam.
Yes. And George Bond coming in here with 10 Aussie buckaroos. Donate now as John Mackay has run out of toilet paper. Good to see you up and about. So I have no idea what that's referencing, but there we go.
Some of us do.
All right, then. We'll move swiftly on. Shogiwa comes in with a question about the section that you were on about earlier, John. Was the debate with the Imam recorded?
Sadly, no permission was given by the school to do this.
Okay. Well, that's a quick answer for you. Right. Okay. So this is a question again coming in from Shogiwa. This might debate a little bit of a discussion. Do penguins keep growing as long as they live?
I think we answered that one a little earlier.
Yeah.
To the best of our knowledge, they do not.
No.
Okay.
No, and the reason is the same reason we don't grow as long as we live, because we are designed to walk vertically, so our weight has to go down through our 2 feet. So we have a sort of clock set, as it were, in our brains to turn off the growth signals and close down the growth signals in the bone. There's just a limit to how much you can grow when you have to walk vertically and you've got all your weight going down through your body.
I suppose a sort of a spin-off question from that would be, do they have aspects of their body that continue to grow as long as they live, like we have, like with our fingernails and our hair and things like that?
Those things continue to grow, but because they are continually worn away, but your bones aren't being worn away all the time, so your body size doesn't change once you stop growing vertically. Yes.
Keratin is, if I'm correct in thinking this, Diane, is basically a form of protein, which is different to the way that your bones and stuff are made up of. So your bones are constantly technically your bones are constantly growing because they're constantly being broken down and rebuilt, and they will reshape as you sort of, develop. If I was to go and learn tennis, for instance, my bones would be regrowing in order to be able to cope with something different, but it's not quite the same as growing in terms of size.
Sam, I've got a question that came into my laptop, which came from your program last week, which I wasn't on, as you know. And first of all, tell people how they can see last week's program.
Yeah, sure. If you go onto our YouTube channel, if you go onto the homepage of our YouTube channel, if you scroll down a little bit, you should be able to see Creation Conversation Season 2. The previous one last week was The Origins of Life, so look for that one. and you should be able to catch up there. I highly recommend that program if you haven't watched it yet, because Diane's speech on the different sort of mechanisms of DNA and proteins and things like that was absolutely phenomenal. It was so good that I saved it and put it as a separate video.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
Presentation.
And the question that came into me was, the person seems to have enjoyed the interview that I gave with Ed Neelan, which you played a segment of, I believe. And
Yes, we did.
they want to know where they can get part 2 of the school program. I don't know if you played a lesson from
Yeah,
the Canadian
we played that very brief, the original origins of the life.
Okay, good. They want to know where they can get the rest of that school
Both
program.
of them,
Can you tell them that, Sam?
Both of them are available on our YouTube channel. So if you just search for Origin of Life in our YouTube channel, they'll be available there.
Also, as well, if you click onto the stream from last week and look at the chat replay, I did post the URLs, the YouTube URL, so you can actually check those out and just look for.
And they can also get this. They can also get the stream of the whole program with Professor Ed Neelan.
Yes, they certainly can. If you go to creationresearchlive.com, is it .com?
Creationresearchlive.com,
Yeah, if you go to there and just search for, if you just type in Ed Neeland, it should be able to come up, or if you put in Origins of Life and things like that, be able to find it through there. Okie dokie.
I think that just going back to Diane's presentation on the DNA, I've suggested to my boys that are in senior high school and early university to watch that to get a really good appreciation of DNA, just the way it works in a sort of summary sort of fashion, as well as just the fantastic design in it.
Also, if you are interested in donating, Diane and I, many years ago, when we first did this, we did a book that went with the whole program. We would love to upgrade it. Actually, we have upgraded it. We would love to print it, because all of what you heard Diane say is in our book. By the time it gets out there, we will have a book where you can read this. So if you want to make a few extra donations towards the book, we'd appreciate that. Hey, Diane.
Yes, we'd really like to do that. We originally wrote it as a school lesson series, but we would like to write it up as a book with a bit of background information, just so that people who don't necessarily have a science background but can understand it, if we provide the information and make that into a nice, interesting, well-illustrated book. It'd be really good to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff.
Yes.
Do you want to do another question, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, let's do one more. Let's do one more question, and if there are any other thank yous to catch up, let's do one more.
Yeah.
Well, thank yous, yes.
Yes. Well, we've had Doki Doki coming in again, swinging with 99 US Centaurus, a smiling face with sunglasses. There we go. You'll need those down under. Won't need those here now. It's dark. Right. So let's do. We've got a question here that's come in from Doki, as he's donated so much of his wealth already. So Doki is asking, does the diving speed of the Peregrine Falcon make more sense in the evolutionary or creation worldview? Thanks.
Out of my field.
Well, I mean, if they
I have to peer at it. Does the flying speed of the Peregrine Falcon make more sense than the evolution?
or if they got it wrong, they'd hit the ground, wouldn't they? Thanks, flat, dead.
Yeah, that's something you have to get
Driving
right
speed
straight
is about
away.
200 miles an hour, isn't it? Something like that, or 200 kilometers an hour.
Yes.
And if they were building up to it, they'd go hungry. So I've seen Peregrine Falcons take birds out of the air mid-speed. Sorry, mid-air.
Yeah.
It's
hit them
300.
in the air.
It's 320
That's not the way it was
per hour.
designed to do it, obviously, but it's used its ability.
It's obviously designed to catch things, but care because all creatures were vegetarians in the beginning. So what apple is moving at 200 kilometers an hour that needs to chase? Who knows? So that one needs to be carefully thought through. It is well designed to dive. It is well designed to increase speed. But then even if you or I fell out of an aeroplane, we would get to almost the same speed, just not intended. By the time
The
we
question
got
is
to the end. So,
control speed. So
Yeah.
it's definitely designed
Mm.
for speed in flying, particularly the way that its body shape is, because a lot of flying machines, planes and the like, have been based off of the Peregrine Falcon's aerodynamics, basically. So it's definitely been able to adapt to fly at those speeds, because it is in the same family as many of the other Falcons, which can't reach those speeds. So I suspect the specifics of the speed is an adaptation, but yeah, it's definitely designed for flight, but also not just speed. It's also precision speed, but also dexterity. Is that the right word? It has a lot of maneuverability at
Yeah.
very, very high speed, which, if you know anything about trying to produce fighter jets or racing cars and stuff like that, actually getting speed is the least of your worries. It's making sure it doesn't fly off and smash into something when it's going at that speed. Right? Rockets are easy because you shoot them straight in one direction, right? And you can get to some phenomenal speeds with rockets. But if you're going to try and fly and not crash into anything and actually have maneuverability, that's where it becomes exceedingly difficult. So
Can I throw in one thought for all of you out there that it occurred to me long ago, and I'm sure God was teaching me something. I grew up evolutionary framework in my head. Everything had to be explained as an adaptation for achieving goal X, right? So the swan was white because it could hide from predators, but Australian black swans were black and they would always have an explanation that had a physical result. But one day, as I'm sitting there watching a beautiful duck, right, one of the ones where they've got these beautiful blue and green and iridescent colors, and one thing occurred to me, that God has made many things simply because they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because they're beautiful to be seen, and there's no other reason apart from the fact that others are watching, e.g. us, and we can say, God, you do beautiful work. Same as we do when we see your brother do some artwork or something, Joe. Man, that is really good, right? Now, what will it achieve? Probably nothing. You won't even be able to sell it. Most artists die poor. They're rich after they're dead. So what you'll find is that there is no physical, pragmatic purpose in killing things or whatever. And it may be even speed falls into this category. Wow, look at that. And it really is. I mean, I know what a Peregrine, I've seen them fly, and I've just got to stand back and say, man, I wish I could do that. It's just a glorious thing. So moderate your questions sometimes about what it's meant to achieve, because maybe it's meant to achieve an artistic, an altruistic effect, because God is who he is, the God of beauty, the God who just delights in amazing us. Probably time
In
to
other
move
words,
on.
they're using what they've got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Using what they've already got.
All right. Shall we leave it there then and carry on?
Yep.
Yeah, let's leave it there and carry on from that. So it's now over to John, I believe, for our next section.
Okay. Do you want to put me my slides full up, Joseph, please?
Yeah, your slides are still up. They're now on the screen. So if you just want to go to your slides, John, it's ready to go.
Okay, so let's do that here. All right, so I've got good news up, because this is almost part 2, but it's part 2.5, because we've got to touch on good to bad to worse as well. Good news is where the Bible says things started. Good news still occurs. On March the 19th, the Bible's already said, we are having a reveal about where this building is. Now, we've been praying for many years for a building somewhere in the southeast of Queensland, for a museum between Caloundra, Coolangatta and Toowoomba. They're all about 100 kilometres outside the centre of Brisbane. And, well, this has been the answer to prayer. It's right slap bang in the centre. How did we get it? A businessman came and said, I don't use the front half of this building. Would you like it for your museum? Now, we can afford free. Praise God for free offers. So on Sunday, March the 19th, those who are on our mailing list here, get in touch with us. because you see, we are having Creation Research Network extended around the planet, getting new brochures ready. And on the day you come, you'll see some of the stuff we've already achieved. Now, there are giants in the land in those days. What were they? The dinosaurs? Big people? That's what this museum is designed to achieve. And secondly, well, we've been talking about some giant animals. There's me on the right-hand side. There's a present-day crocodile in the middle, and there's a fossil crocodile on the left-hand side. Now, getting smaller and smaller, the textbooks call it evolution. It's also degeneration. We see it when you can't get enough food. I mean, having bred animals all my life, you cut their food, they don't grow to their maximum. The Bible talks about the world going downhill. After Noah's flood, look for a loss of food, a loss of good climate. It'll do that thing in the water or out. But you see, if you want to come to our opening, we've got limited seats. The building has only one seminar room at the moment, holds 50 people. We can't have any more than 50 in any one go. We'll have quite a few openings. It's entry by ticket only. So for those of you in Oz, yes, we don't mind if you book Qantas flight XYZ from London to come if you really want to, but you have to apply. Entry is by ticket only, which is why we haven't told you where it is. We'll come back to that. You just buy fossils. Remember we started discussing that? We grow fossils, living fossils. We grow plants with big thorns on because I showed you that thorn before. I found that thorn September 2009, and we found many since then. Look at those sharp spikes. And I love finding fossil thorns. And because none of it was in my university studies. You see, plants like roses evolve thorns to protect themselves from sheep and camels. Well, I'm sorry, I've grown roses, I've had sheep. The sheep take no notice of the thorns. The evolutionary story doesn't make any sense. There's me in the Ordovician rocks in Carthage, Tennessee, and there it is in the Tennessee geology from the side, Pennsylvania above, Cambrian below, Ordovician in the middle, all 8,000 feet, 2,500 meters of it. There we are. Oh, by the way, ex-Vice President Al Gore lives just around the corner from where this rock was exposed. And look what we found. Let's get a bit closer. You see, I was amazed when I began to notice that this rock had not just furry things to the outside, these were tough thorns. And I thought, I can't believe this. This is fossil thorns because it's got all sorts of implications. You blow it up even more and they're very carbon strong. They're unbendable. They're thorns. I know that because you see this specimen is also in my collection. It comes from the original oldest deposits up there in Canada, in Quebec. This is Sordonia. It's Devonian. But ours was Sordonia. Yes, you heard me right. I took it up to the professor, an expert. I said, what do you think this is? He said Sordonia. And I said, it compares to this one in Canada. Yes, that's Sordonia. Which Devonian rock did you get it from? And I said, I didn't get it from a Devonian rock. This comes from Ordovician. He said, but Sordonia didn't evolve until the Devonian. No, he was wrong. But he judged all of his fossils. The age of the fossil was governed by its position in the evolutionary story. Well, there's another close-up. Can you see the spines there? The thorns, the prickles? I use those three words because, you see, even though they're technically three different things, most people, when they touch a rose thorn, think of it as a thorn. It's really not. It's a prickle. Look at this. There's the original one, and here's ours. Oh, notice ours. Ours and the Devonian one are all lined up. Water has been running through here, mixing these land plant thorns with seashells. Yep, Joe will confirm it. We found it with crinoids and seashells in limestone, prickly land plants. It was a rapid current deposit. Now, as we've said on our program on the geologic column, you can find them, well, we found them all the way, but down to where? Well, we live above the top layer. This is the orthodox geological column. We found thorns in the Miocene. We found thorns right down the bottom. We found them in the Devonian. We found them in the Ordovician. See, our find comes from right down the bottom. So yes, we do buy fossils, but mostly we try to get out there and dig them up ourselves. Dinosaur rib cages, plesiosaur teeth, all sorts of titanosaur stuff. Yes, you heard me right. We've gone out and got them ourselves. But our find is the oldest one on the planet, grudgingly acknowledged, but not in print. You see, how could creationists find any decent fossils? Well, the reality is it was the creationists who found all the first fossils. That's how the geologic work got off and running. We have a world record, and it will be on display in our museum in March the 19th. So if you're interested, remember these rocks provably formed after Adam's sin because there was no thorns. Oh, there was hair growths. There was little creepers and crawlers that actually would hold on to a stem as it climbed up. But as those creepers and crawlers go hard, they become spines and thorns and prickles. Yes, you've asked about adaptation. You could call that an adaptation if you like, but it wouldn't happen in a world where mist rose up every day and everything was soft and gentle. And we can watch this happening in our gardens. We do it deliberately to prove to the students that the thorns are part of the original creation, but they didn't function as thorns. They functioned as soft, gentle tendrils. Devonian, Ordovician, well, you just buy fossils? No, we grow living fossils. We actually go out there and we dig them up. We'd ask you to make the real point. You see, there's the cliff where I first found those fossils. And people say, oh, Nova Scotia, Canada, that rock there is Carboniferous, millions of years old. Well, get your history in your hand right. The word Carboniferous was invented by a clergyman. Yes, because the rocks had coal in them, carbon in them. These names have nothing to do with evolution. Or the top bits do, because Charles Lyell entered the picture and then tied his names to where the fossils were found. But Carboniferous simply got to do with coal. And I found those fossils right down the bottom. Fantastic. Look at that. Look at that. I ask people this all the time. What sort of a fossil is this? And without a doubt, they tell me that's some kind of thorn. And it's easy to prove. It is. Except look at the size they used to be. Aren't you glad they're not as big now? Oh, but now they're hard. Originally, they started as soft. And you say, well, were those ones in the fossils hard? Yes. Once they go black, you can tell how much carbon was in them. The amount of carbon that was in them tells you whether they were soft or hard. The thorns in our fossils had enough carbon to make coal. Sorry, seaweed doesn't make coal because it's only one cell thick. These were, I mean, look at that coal hanging off the bottom of that big thorn. Yep, these were enough thick in carbon cells to actually make a lovely deposit of coal. That's why it's in Carboniferous. But here's the point we're making. You see, in our museum opening, we will be talking about good to bad to worse, how even the thorns start out as a pre-designed holder, as a pre-designed thing that enables it to stand upright as it grows. Yes, we have climbing roses. We have climbing thorns. We have climbing, oh, sorry, not thorns. I meant ferns. And when they dry out, they turn into climbing thorns. Nice and soft when they're gentle. But in a world that's degenerating, it's not just the plants that are degenerating. It's not just the animals. The whole environment goes downhill, and their ability to survive that is what you and I call adaptation. If they don't have that ability built in, they bomb out, and many creatures have. Look, is that rock 300 million years old with that lovely coal layer over it? Well, I have to tell you this. My experience with geologists is they don't care how old that rock layer is there. You see, they use words like Pennsylvanian or Carboniferous, but what they really mean is 200 or 300 million years old. But look up the man who invented the word Carboniferous. He didn't even believe the world was millions of years old. The people who invented the term Pennsylvanian didn't believe in 300 millions or whatever. You'll find they don't care how old it is today. They only care how old it isn't. Because if I say the evidence here shows there were thorns, that meant this rock was formed after Adam sinned. You get that? You find thorns, the rock was formed after Adam sinned. So it's not just plants that have gone downhill. It's not just thorns that are suffering from drying out. It's our brain and our whole attitude which has also gone downhill. Joe loves that verse. So do I. Beware of false science that will lead you astray. When you have a look at these fossil thorns, don't forget, you want to be wise enough to include what the Bible says. Adam and Eve did not live in a thorny world. They did live in a world where plants already had tendrils, which would sadly, after the fall, turn hard. It lived in a world where it had beautiful plants that had clingers. I mean, we've got a curse of a plant in my yard. It clings on to you. But eventually, I'll tell you what, the little clingers will dry up and the seed will drop off. Thorns and thistles, they wouldn't annoy you in the beginning. They do now. This rock formed after Adam sinned. Or is your brain and your worldview also gone so far downhill you can't see that? Because the whole purpose of creation research, there's me and Joe on a field trip just before COVID break open. And yes, we find all sorts of fossils. We dig them up. We put them in our museum. And part of our museum's role will be to remind people to watch out for false science. The false science that we get accused of, sorry, it's just them looking in a mirror about what they're leaving out. So for those of you in Oz, yes, glad you've joined us. But on March the 19th, 2:30 to 4:30, it's a Sunday afternoon, we're going to have a reveal about where this building is. And we're going to praise the Lord that this businessman saw fit to say, I love what you do. Feel free to use my building. And what's even better, just round the corner, we're going to make a custom-made building, not just for storage, but where you can have a real museum entry. Fantastic. Don't forget, limited seats, entry by ticket only. The first 50 are the only ones who are going to make it to reveal number one. Then Craig Hawkins will be up in a month's time as well. Diane's coming up for the first one. Craig will be up for the second one. We will have a second one coming up a couple of weeks later. You can put me back on screen there, Joe.
There we go. And Joe is on mute. So there we go. That's
I don't think. Is that any better?
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah, we're back. I don't know what was going on then. I didn't think I was on mute. Anyway, I pressed the button there. Must have knocked him by accident. Great stuff. Well, we're about an hour and a half into the program, which is great, and we've covered most of the sort of PowerPoint presentations and stuff. I just wanted to show you one or two quick things, John, which we can comment on from then, and can talk about snakes and go off into there. But I wanted to show you a couple of other fossils. Both of these have been found by us, dug up by us. You probably recognise it, John.
Joe, excuse me, I'm going to have to go down and check on my wife, then I'll come on back.
Sure, yeah, no worries. Yeah, I'll just hold this one up. Anyway, I was just going to say, I was going to get John to see if he recognises where this is, but this is actually from Kings Barnes, which I'm planning on doing a field trip up to Kings Barnes in Scotland at some point. But you can see what you're looking at there is one of the giant horsetail fossils. So today they're sort of spindly little piddly things, little reed fossils, and this is one of the much larger fossils that you find in the fossil record. And this is a small one compared to some of the things that you get in the fossil record. These are essentially enormous trees. One of my favorite ones are actually the club mosses.
Just a question on that first fossil, Joe. Is that in a sedimentary rock?
Yes, it is in sedimentary rock. Yes, it's in a
See,
sort of kind of a light, sandstone.
Yeah, well, I've actually been trying to study up on identifying types of rocks to try and do a little bit better during these show and tells.
Well, you'll find that most fossils are in sedimentary rock. So sedimentary is made up of sediment particles, right? You can get some fossils in igneous rock, but they are more unusual because igneous is volcanic, right? So generally, if anything's going to be taken over by molten lava, it's going to be destroyed quite quickly. But you do find some like hematite fossils, which is a form of volcanic rock, which sometimes have some like ammonite and stuff like that caught up in them occasionally. And the one in between is, of course, metamorphic, which is when either volcanic rock or sedimentary rock has gone under heat and or pressure or a chemical change which has altered its chemical form. And you do find some fossils in metamorphic rocks in what we call low-grade metamorphosed rocks. An example of that would be slate. So if you get shale, which is sort of a mudstone, right, you get lots and lots of fossils in the shale, the Jurassic shales and so on and so forth. If that goes under low-grade metamorphism, then you end up with slate. And then high-grade metamorphosed mudstone or shales is a rock called gneiss. Spelt with a G. But in the case of slate, so we're in border of Wales where we are, the Creation Research Centre, so there's tons and tons of slate all around here. And if you go down to South Wales, where I've collected with John, you'll find that you can find graptolite fossils in slates, you can find trilobite fossils in slate, and occasionally you can actually see where the fossil has been formed in the mudstone, right? But then it's part of the metamorphic process has actually shunted it. It's kind of deformed it. So you end up with these kind of squashed and deformed trilobites as well. But most of your fossils are in sedimentary rock. So that big one is in a sandstone. The pipefish earlier is in a sort of a chalky limestone. And then there's this one as well, which is, I was saying, just over the border in Wales around Snowdonia. You can go collecting club mosses, little tassel ferns and stuff like that. And this is basically a massive root of a club moss tree, a tassel fern tree known as a lepidodendron. And this is just a single root. I mean, today they're scrawny little things that kind of sprawl out over the ground. In the past, they had roots like trees. So you'll find a lot of the polystrate trees as well are these lycopods, which you find in places in the Carboniferous rocks, but in places like Northumberland, in Tennessee, and so on and so forth. So it looks like John has come back again. Oh, sorry, I've just put myself up. There we are. There we are. Good stuff, John. Yeah, I was just saying, I didn't know if you recognised where this was from, John.
Hold it down a bit. The Edinburgh fish.
It's not. No, it's not the fish. It's the. It's the.
A bit out of focus to me.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah. Oh no, that's the horsetail root.
Horsetail, yeah. It's the King's Barnes ones.
Yeah.
That we collected up around there. Many times. I know you've been up there, but yeah, we're just talking more examples of this sort of good to bear to worse, this downhill generation as we go. So, no, it's good stuff. Right. Shall we do a few more questions then before we begin to wrap up? And
yeah, certainly.
Can I come into one? Sorry, yes, Sam. I come into one that I just saw that's come up a few times about the geologic column there. About when is it okay to invoke the possibility of extra? Oh, sorry, not that one. Where it dropped to. My point is that if signs of predation point to a post-fall world, you are pushing the fall back to a time when all around was bugs and tiny things like that. Can I encourage whoever's writing this to go and have a look at our whole program on the geologic column? Because you're assuming the order of events in the fossils represents the history of life on Earth, and it really doesn't. This is a post-biblical and really a post-Lyellian view of the history of the world, right? So you need to sort out where you want to say life started, but don't assume that the geologic column represents, first of all, creation in perfection, then Noah's flood or the history of the world. So if you say I find predation down the bottom, that means predation was there before the fall. No, you've got two different totally worldviews mixed up. So Sam, do we have a link to our program on the geologic column anywhere?
Is that the one we did with Donnie? We can probably get that up, can't we? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you can, the other thing, and I'd also recommend with some of the questions that are coming in, we have a video we did quite a while ago, and it was in one sense always unpopular because we called it something that Richard Dawkins hates. Don't use that word devolution, right? Devolution means a downward change, so that we started out bigger, smarter. We did not adapt to become smaller. Some people have degenerated so that pygmies stop growing because their pituitary gland cycle is broken and it will cease about 11 years of age. They have to reach sexual maturity by then or they will die out. So they're small because they have a deformity. They are not small because they've adapted. Now, they may be able to run through jungles and the big Zulus can't chase them, and you could say that's a benefit, but in reality, it forces them to only live in the jungles, whereas once they could live everywhere. So I'd encourage you, you can stream it, I believe, The Devolution of Man. You can get up the few copies of DVDs that are left. I don't know if you have any, Joe, but The Devolution of Man puts this into perspective with technology. Adam didn't need warm clothes. It never was cold. Adam didn't. Oh, that's the birds outside. Adam didn't need boomerangs because he wasn't going hunting. Maybe he used them to bring down some of the big fruit. Okay, back to you, Joe.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for that. Well, let's. We've got a little bit of time left, so maybe we could just deal with. Maybe we should go over and do Diane's presentation on snakes, because that's a nice link into the good to bad to worse as well, and then we'll finish up with running through a few questions and pulling together some of those bits. And of course, if there are any questions that we don't get to, we've got a Q&A session, a specific Q&A session coming up in the next couple of weeks. So be ready for that. Diane, over to you. If we put your slides up, are you just about ready to go?
Yes, we've. This is our program that we had on, or to do with our most recent newsletter, the one that only went out yesterday or overnight if you're on the other side of the world. And in fact, it does relate to what we've been talking about. And if I can just get the slides to move. Are we moving? No, we're not. Let's see.
If you just click on your presentation,
Yeah,
Diane.
that's right. There we go. That's better.
Good stuff.
Yes, Creation Research News. One of our stories was about snakes. And it was about how snakes have evolved, according to some scientists in Western Australia. You'll have to excuse the cockatoos. I have the windows open because it is still summer in Australia, and it's morning, so the cockatoos and other birds are having a whale of a time here. But anyway, in our newsletter, we had a story about supposed evolution in tiger snake jaws. Now, tiger snakes are called tiger snakes because a lot of them have a distinctive striped pattern. It varies among the different species, but some of them are particularly stripy, others are not. And this story was promoted in quite a number of the secular media mainstream stories because it's about snakes, and Australia is famous for snakes, and it's about evolution. So here was the headline on a website called The Conversation, which does actually have quite a good science reporting section. On a tiny Australian island, snakes feasting on seabirds evolved huge jaws in a surprisingly short time. So there is also a good story behind this. It goes back to 1930 when a travelling showman is supposed to have released tiger snakes onto a little island off the coast of Western Australia. It's only a really tiny dot on the map, just a little rocky outcrop. And he was accused of having a dangerous carnival show because he used to display poisonous snakes, and apparently some of the venomous snakes bit people. And so the story is he got rid of these by taking them to Karnak Island. Now, on this little rocky island, there was no small prey. In other words, the things that the snakes normally eat, like small frogs or small mice or things like that on this island. However, the snakes did survive because some of them were able to eat seabird chicks. Like a lot of rocky outcrops, seabirds tend to use it as a nesting site. And so on Karnak Island, which is the name of this island, the snakes now have larger jaws than the mainland snakes. So that was the gist of the story. Here is evolution in action in less than a century. And so some of the scientists thought, well, that's interesting. Let's look at how it could have happened. So they actually did a study of snakes from Karnak Island and snakes from a colony of snakes on the mainland in Western Australia. And they studied these snakes, and they found that the Karnak Island snakes were born with larger jaws. And so they got snakes from the mainland, from Karnak Island, and they divided each of the different snakes into 2 different groups, and they fed them on different diets. Now, they didn't give them seabird chicks to eat. They had small mice or large mice. And it turned out that the Karnak Island snakes' jaws grew larger if they were fed on large mice. But the mainland snakes' jaws, well, they grew at the same rate, irrespective of what they were given to eat. So let's go back to our news story that got out into the general news. You know, here is a good story about evolution. Right, remember the headline? On a tiny Australian island, snakes feasting on seabirds evolved huge jaws in a surprising short time. So we need to ask, how big is huge? 5%. Are you impressed? And the other important question to ask is, when you see stories like this, keep these things in mind. Right, are they evolving? And the answer is no, they're not. Because in fact, they are the same species of snakes. They are still tiger snakes. All they have is snakes that have a slightly bigger jaw. Now, the interesting thing is that the process that was supposed to have brought about this evolutionary change was described as being phenotypic plasticity. Now, are you familiar with that? What's that? Yes, don't let anyone belt you over the head with a big word or bluff you. If you don't understand what something means, just ask for an explanation in plain language. Now, Craig gave a really good example of that in his seahorse talk earlier on, where some evolutionists had written this technical description of what could have happened to seahorses, and Craig gave a good explanation of it in plain language. So go back and watch that if you missed it. So, phenotypic plasticity. Let's have a look at that. We need to go back to 2 words, phenotype versus genotype. Okay, phenotype is basically what you see or study if you look at a living organism and see how it works. So it's the observed characteristics of a living organism, and it is the result of gene expression plus interaction with the environment. There is interaction with the environment. The environment does affect the function and structure of things to a certain extent, right? Now, behind that, you have the genotype. That's your inherited genes, right? All of your DNA. So all the information carried on your genes. Now, we need to remember that not all genes are expressed all the time. So phenotypic plasticity or phenotypic plasticity is simply the ability to change a body structure in response to a change in the environment or changes in demands on the body. So it's modification of existing structures. It doesn't make new ones. It just modifies the things that you've already got in your body a little bit. So with the snakes, right, the jaws grew larger. Doesn't make new structures. The snakes already had jaws, and they were jaws with the same structure. They were just a bit bigger. So it's actually a design feature. It can only happen if you already have the genes that have the ability to respond to those changes. So it's not an evolutionary process. So what happened on Karnak Island? Yes, the snakes did change, but they didn't evolve. What happened is a non-evolutionary process, and it involves that process that Charles Darwin wrote about that supposedly drove evolution, right? Natural selection. Again, a real process, but not an evolutionary process. So what happened? Well, large-jawed snakes had an advantage to survive and reproduce because they could eat the bigger prey, the seabirds. Snakes with jaws that were too small, well, they died out because they couldn't get any food. So after many generations, the large-jawed snakes are going to dominate the population because they're the ones that lived and reproduce. So that becomes the norm for that particular population in those circumstances. Phenotypic plasticity simply meant that the snakes had a genetic predisposition to grow larger jaws when only large prey was available. So they had the genetic ability to respond to that extra demand that's being made on their bodies. But again, it wasn't a huge difference. It was just a modification of an existing structure. So living things do change, but they don't evolve. And so don't be pulled into the accusation that we get from skeptics, oh, you creationists don't believe in any change, or you don't believe that things can adapt. We do believe in those things, but it is limited and it's not evolution. Now, the other stories we had on in our newsletter did relate to what we've been looking at in our whole theme today. We had a nice design story about some self-planting seeds, and we had a degeneration story. And John brought that up about human degeneration, and it's about violence, which is fairly degenerative in human society. So it's not just structure and function, it's also behavior when you're looking at human society. So do have a look at those. If you missed the newsletter, you can catch up with all of our stories on our fact file. We archive those science, history, archaeology type stories. We archive them separately, so you can just do a keyword search and find them. You don't need to know when the newsletter was sent out. And if you'd like to get the newsletter, it's free. You can sign up from our main website. If you go to our Creation Research website, our main website, you can sign up for that. But I would recommend that you sign up for the newsletter, because you also get lots of news and photos about the Creation Research Ministry. So we did have a bit about the new museum site that we're going to be working on in Brisbane, and also some stories from Glenn, who's not with us, from the US, and from Craig's little foray to Western Tasmania that we learned about last week. So you get lots of encouraging news and some photos as well as these science reports. So if we can just come back to us, are there any more questions or comments?
Diane.
Yeah, I think it's about time that we. Sorry, go on, John.
Can I just make a comment, because folks can see some of what you were talking about, and again to remind our listeners. We are not talking about evolution, but devolution on a process that's already there. And in this series, Darwin on the Rocks and No Time for Darwin, etc., a 3-part series, which is now available as MP3s and as streaming, we did a whole big experiment with toads. Remember? The toads were racing around Australia, and the bigger ones were winning. And so the argument was, toads are evolving bigger legs, bigger jumps, etc. And of course, they've had much more time now. And we set up that experiment in which we got toads from all around the district just to show what was happening. We set up a toad race course. We had an official toad starter, right? And beyond a shadow of a doubt, by the time they'd got all along our race course, the toads that were already bigger at the start were the ones that got to the end first. Now, if you allow them to breed, there's no little genes in that pool. So only the big toads breed. Now, that's what happened. But then we hit them with a cruncher. You see, eventually the little toads catch up. And all of a sudden, the gene pool goes back to normal. So despite the fact the evolution says the toads have adapted, the toads have evolved, they have not done either of that. You have simply had a selection process which selects that which is available. And eventually, when the little toads catch up, everything calms down and the average sized toad goes back to normal. So for those of you who are puzzling and saying you believe in evolution far faster than the evolutionists do, no, we are not talking about evolution. You're using the word evolution for any change. There is evolution, which is the progressive change, which is Darwinian use, or there is devolution. We don't mind you talking about devolution. It's even true for the change in size of toads. It's not necessarily always in their favour. But Diane, any more comments on that? Or Joseph, any other questions?
Well, unless there's any comments from Diane.
Yeah, there's a trend at the moment to call all biological processes evolution. And again, don't let anyone bluff you about that. there is lots of change in biology, but none of it is evolution. So don't let people use that word just for any biological processes. Living things are constantly active, they are constantly changing, but none of it's evolution. So don't let people label things that are not evolution as being such. It's a bit of a sort of media blitz at the moment to label all biological processes as evolution. And even in the professional literature, they're doing it as well.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. Yeah, maybe we've got about 10 minutes or so for some questions. Obviously, Craig's had to drop out, but Sam, over to you for a few minutes of questions.
All right. Okay. Well, I promised transfluency. I've been asking this question for a while, so it's about time we answered it. So, question: when is it okay, if ever, to invoke the possibility of an extra biblical miracle as a solution to a possibly intricate problem in creation science?
Well, the answer is when you turn water into wine. Okay, the end result was what you'd call natural. The starting point was natural, but getting from water to wine, which has got alcohol and massive molecular flavors in it, that is miraculous beyond a shadow of a doubt. In fact, even Jesus, who did that, would not claim he was using natural processes at all. Diane, any comment on that sort of a question?
Extra biblical miracles as a solution to intractable problems in creation science. I would hesitate before invoking miracles. I think there's a lot of ignorance, and I don't mean that derogatory. I mean just simply we haven't done the research. So there's still a lot to find out. We don't know all the answers, and we're still learning lots of things. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we try and keep up with the scientific news, because whether they like it or not, the scientists are actually studying God's world, so they are finding out God's processes, whether they're creative processes or original design processes or their degeneration processes as a result of sin and judgment. So I would hesitate before saying something was a miracle. It may be that we just don't understand the process, but at the same time, God is still the God of the real world, and he is still capable of miracles, and he can certainly change things. As we see within the Bible, right? Water turning into wine, fish and people being raised from the dead. That requires a lot of creative processes, I can assure you, because when people die, the degenerative processes come into act very quickly. You need a lot of new creation there. So yes, there are a lot of things that we simply don't understand the processes yet, but that is an incentive for young people to get involved in science. There's lots of things to find out. And if you look at them from a biblical mindset, from design followed by degeneration, I think we'll find a lot of answers to biological processes and other processes in the world today as well.
Yeah.
I'll give you a general rule that I find helpful. When you have a dice, right, or a die as the word goes, it's got one side, then two, then three, then four, then five, then six. Now, if I want you to use one die and throw it and get the result 7, you can't, because the end possibilities are built into the design of the thing in the beginning. Now, there is a good general rule there for telling when somebody has interfered from the outside, and we use it even in casinos. If I take 2 dices, right, and then you say, what's the possibility of both dices showing up 6 every time it's thrown? The answer is 0, right? It just doesn't happen. You can run experiment after experiment. It won't happen. You will get 6s a certain number of times, but when the casino managers deal with the government, they are allowed to have winners X% of the time. They rig the answers so they can win enough money to keep the casino going. So we do have ways of telling when intelligent design or miracles have come from the outside, whether it's miraculous intervention by the casino owner who rigs the machine to do this, or whether it shows up. You take carbon by itself, there's many things it can do, but there's many things it cannot do and will never be able to do. Carbon plus oxygen plus hydrogen never makes life. right? Run every experiment you like. Have a look at Ed Nealon's DVD. Have a look at the program they did last week. That's really what Diane and the others were on about. You will find a very easy way of ruling out natural processes alone. That's the rules that I've come up with, and they'll be very, very useful to you and help you decide, hey, I'm stuck here, God. All I can do is put you in because you said you created life. It's a simple illustration. Like I had a block of crystals here from amethyst. Amethyst always has a 6-sided crystal. How often can you throw a dice that's got 6 sides and always get 6s? Sorry, you won't get that in the real world. How often can you throw the molecules of silica and oxygen and only ever get a 6-sided result? The answer is you're looking at a created design.
When you're talking about the idea of an extra biblical miracle, so that you're dealing with something that perhaps isn't specifically referenced in scripture, so God did this very specific thing, you can often find that anything to do with creation science, so whether it's regards to Noah's flood, the creation, stuff like that, inherently is a supernatural act. That's the entire thing that we're dealing with, right? There is an element of supernatural work in place here. And I remember talking to John about this a little while back, particularly in relation to like the the so-called flood heat problem and stuff like that. One of the things we're looking at is in scripture in the New Testament, in the case of a biblical miracle, right? You have a case where the disciples are on a boat in the lake, on one side of the Lake of Galilee, and then immediately they were on the other side of the lake. You have another case where Philip is walking with the Ethiopian eunuch, right, having just baptized him and taken him through the gospel, and then immediately Philip is raptured to a place a long way away, many miles away. Now, if you and John, you may need to jog my memory on this, but we went to one of our rocket scientists who deals a lot with in terms of thermonuclear energy and the kind of energy that is produced from things like this, and the volume of energy, the volume of heat that would be produced from transporting somebody from one place to another place instantaneously is enormous, enough to rip your entire world apart, right? Literally your entire planet. Now, there is clearly a supernatural element at work here, which is beyond the normal forces that we are subjected to in physics, right? It's something that is supernaturally happening here. Now, the reality is, while the flood had very, very physical implications, right, and we've been looking at some of these implications tonight, new rock layers, global rock layers, fossils, death of all mankind. These are all very physical and real implications, or realities, if you like. But the reality is the flood is a supernatural act. We can speculate as to whether God caused a miracle to send down asteroids or meteors to trigger the flood. We can speculate as to some of the mechanisms by which he contains heat problems and so on and so forth. And these are all good to speculate on. They're all good to delve down in on. They're all good to add to our knowledge. But the reality is the entire global flood was a supernatural act of God. It was God's judgment on mankind. And the very reality that man actually survived the flood, along with 2 of every kind of animals, was also an act of God, not just in him revealing to Noah that there was going to be a flood and also here's a boat and here's the dimensions and here's how you want to make it, but the very fact of being kept safe and being held together, even to the point of God sending Noah the animals for knowing the genetic information that they're containing to know what they would need to repopulate an entire world. The whole thing is a supernatural event, right? So there has got to be an element of miracle, and there will also be an element of what you might refer to as an extra biblical miracle, right? It does not specifically say God contained the heat within the flood, but he does say he sent the flood as a result, as judgment on mankind. And it also says that he kept Noah and his family safe because Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So put 2 and 2 together, and you have no doubt that there is God's sustaining power on this event, regardless of how deep you want to delve into the science or try and explain it naturally. Any comments, John?
Yeah, one specific one, because we're talking about the past here. Let's bring it up to the present. I've been in Christian work now for over 40 years. I went into Christian work purely because a dear old lady said, well, if God's called you to do this thing, Don't you worry about the church. God will pick up your bills. Step out and do it. Now, 50 years later, I still don't have too much money. I'm not bankrupt. I still have enough food for the table. But to give you a pragmatic example of us versus nature, one of the first things I got involved with was a script union outreach on the beach. Now, in summer, our beaches are crowded with anywhere from semi-naked to almost fully naked people. Many of them have never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. We were there to preach to them. In those days, you were allowed with a permit to have a microphone on the beach and a PA. And we were there. The kids were having a wonderful time listening to the Bible teacher, and the teenagers all the way down. And all of a sudden, the wind changed. Now, if you've ever been on the beach and the wind's coming in the right direction, you can hear the PA, and then it changes to exactly the opposite. I leaned to my friend beside me and said, "Can you hear anything?" "No." I said, "I can't hear anything either. It's the wind that's taking everything away." Now, the Bible says something very humbling about wind. It says, you don't know, weather bureau, you don't know, BOM, you don't know the people who are the forecasters, you don't know where the wind comes from or where it goes. I do. I'm the one that sends the wind. So very quickly I said, "Lord, I have no way of doing anything about this. But if you could please change the wind back to the other direction, we need these kids to hear the gospel." Now, within a fraction of a second, the wind actually did change and it came back and everyone could hear. Now, if that's what you mean by miracle, I'm 100% with your definition. I didn't do that. All I did was ask, and I asked on the basis of a promise, which is a real test. John chapter 14, verses 13 and 14 and 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. I will make myself known to you. And then the last two verses of that section, whatever you ask in my name, that the Father will be glorified, that's what I'll do. And he did, right? So miracles are part of everyday Christianity, and I don't really expect to die rich. I'm not asking for money. The government probably wants it off me before I get it, but I am asking for the Lord to continue to provide for Joe, for Sam, for Diane, and for Creation Research, and our new opening on March the 19th. If you live in Southeast Queensland, sign up. It's on our website.
Yeah, and just something from me quickly as a sort of like a layman's person, as I'm going through the Bible from start to finish. When you're approaching things from a sort of purely analytical science point of view, there is a sort of disconnect between God, doing these things and tangible things you see in the real world, because God created the universe and everything inside it and knows exactly how it works, how it operates, how molecules work, how electrons and everything, gravity, all these things, knows how to use these natural processes to do miracles and what would seem miraculous to us anyway, because we don't understand them, but also is free because it's his created universe with unlimited creative power. He can do what he wants within it as well. So that's something you also have to sort of get your head around when you're dealing with these issues, is that yes, okay, yeah, it might appear that this might be a cop-out, but then you are also approaching this issue, which is by its nature a faith-based position in a supernatural creator, which it boggles the mind as to sort of the power, but you have to sort of get over that hump and sort of admit to yourself, okay, so if I were to approach this, I have to have some form of open mind, and even possibly there is a possibility of a miracle happening. So that's my take anyway. Yeah. Hey, if you're not joining me, join me on the Bible Journey Challenge, where I'm reading the Bible from start to finish.
Yes, indeed.
No,
all right, Joe, I'm going to have to start to leave soon.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've sort of hit the 2-hour mark, which is great. We've covered a lot of stuff. We know that there's a lot of questions that we haven't actually got to, but we do keep a record of them all. And in the next few weeks, or the next couple of weeks, we'll be having a Q&A special, as we often do every sort of 6 weeks or so. Yes, thank you, Sam. That's what I was then going to just quickly ask you. Any other thank yous?
Yes. One from Doki Doki. So thank you so much indeed for that one. That's all the thank yous we've got for this evening.
Good.
So
marvelous stuff. Thank you all very much.
And we're all good to go.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much. God bless you all. It's been great, and hopefully you've enjoyed this topic. It's obviously a huge topic that we can go off everywhere, and that's part of the reason why I picked it, because there's so many different avenues and so many different pieces of evidence. Join us next week, as it is actually our birthday celebration. Do we have a graphic for that? I think we do. Yeah, there we go, Sam. It's our birthday celebration. 2 years we've been doing this now, once a week, and we're going to recap on our most popular topic on this channel. It's had more views than anything else, and they always receive great views. And it's also become a bit of a birthday tradition, because it's actually what we started Creation Conversations all about, which is the whole issue of climate change, global warming, God as sovereign, and all that kind of stuff. We did it for our second birthday celebrate our first birthday, 1 year birthday celebrations, and we're going to come back on it on our second anniversary birthday celebrations as well, this whole issue of climate change. So we'll be looking at that and giving some up-to-date details on that as well. So great stuff, as well as obviously normal celebrations, as well as ministry updates, reports, evidence news, and all the rest of it. So from me and the rest of the team, thank you all very much. It's been great to see you all. Goodbye, God bless, and we will see you next week. Be sure to join us there.
Yes, indeed.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.